Welcome to Fearlessly Made You. I am your host, Kristie Tobias. Joining me today are guests just striving to dominate in their personal and professional lives while answering the question, what does it mean to be fearlessly made? On this episode of Fearlessly Made You, I told y'all it was going to happen. I'm bringing you more Tobiases. So you had a chance to meet my brother, my youngest brother, Josh Tobias. Now you guys are going to have a chance to meet my baby sister, Gabbi Tobias. Gabbi is a manager of educational counseling with Bright Horizons. But more importantly, Gabbi is my baby sister, and that is the most important thing that you need to know about Gabbi is she's my baby sister, my little nugget, although she's taller than me. Gabbi, welcome to Fearlessly Made You.
What's up?
And you know what? Cheers to the Tobias takeover of Fearlessly Made You. Cheers. I love it. Mm-hmm. You know, we had to have a little sip. So one of the cool things that I do love about having Fearlessly Made You is I get to tell my story, but I also get to help other people tell their stories and be a voice. And that's one of the real reasons why I wanted to have each of my siblings on, because we all represent so many different aspects of our life and our upbringing. But Gabbi's world and the work that she gets to do is pretty amazing and pretty cool. And so I'm not going to keep talking about her. I would love Gabbi to kind of tell you a little bit more about herself, who she is, and really kind of, you know, what makes Gabbi Gabbi, and then we'll dive into things. But Gabbi, I'm gonna let you tell our Fearlessly Made You crew a little bit more about you.
Yeah, so like Kristie said, I'm a manager of educational counseling. So long story short, I work in education, and that's not the path I intended to take in my life, but it's the path that I'm blessed to be down and the path that I'm blessed to be a part of right now. I got into it by working as an admissions counselor for about 5 or so years in my lifetime. So basically what I did is I traveled all across the country and I recruited high school students to go to a smallish university in central North Carolina. I currently live in Southern California, and so I guess we can talk about that later. I don't know if that's the subject of the podcast.
Whatever you want it to be, girl.
Okay, cool. But I recruited students, and this was only supposed to be kind of like a one-stop shop job. I wanted to go to law school. I knew from the time I was, 9 years old that law school was like, I was destined to be a lawyer. And I took the LSAT. I actually applied to law schools and it just didn't work out for me. I did an internship, I think my senior year of college. And I decided I don't want to do this anymore. Like I kind of had like a come to Jesus moment. And I was just like, I don't think this is me, which kind of helped segue into like what I do now. Because I don't want any student or anybody to go through that type of realization their senior year of college when they're about to graduate and it's a little too late, you should have known that by now. But I was kind of not a slow bloomer, but a late bloomer, I would say.
That's fair. I think that's fair too. And I almost want to hold there because I think too, each of us, like as siblings, had such different pathways that we went down. And I would almost kind of like not necessarily, there's nothing wrong with being a late bloomer by whatever we say. But I think too, the other part of it is that I admire the most about Gabbi, most about you is that Gabbi has always been very fierce, and when things feel right, they feel right. And when they feel wrong, they feel wrong. And I think for me, I wasn't always that confident and felt conviction in that way sometimes. And I'd go down certain pathways because they were like, well, this is what I was doing, and I guess this is where I go. But I think that was the thing that I did very much admire about, and do still admire about you, is when it doesn't feel right, you're like, nope. We're not doing this. So I think that's the thing about it. And I think that's something too, like, let's kind of stay in that moment too, because I think that also hits on something for you. Like I have the privilege of having seen Gabbi, as a kid, and as a baby, she felt that way. Like when she was unamused and when she was done, she was done. But I'm so curious, coming from your own perspective and your lens, that's how I've seen you. But I'm curious for you, like, is that how you've always felt? Like, do you kind of have this gut feeling when I'm done, I'm done, or when this doesn't make sense, this doesn't make sense?
That's actually a really good question. And I feel like going into like my early 20s, so I'll say like college and maybe a little bit of high school, I was kind of that person people knew me as. I'm not going to put up with anything that I don't want to do.
Yes.
Or that I don't feel comfortable doing. I mean, you know this. And I think that kind of related to our upbringing a little bit more. I was always that kind of person where, like, you know, that kind of Irish goodbye.
Yeah.
But I think, to be honest, now that I've kind of gotten into, when I kind of first transitioned into my first job that I did after college, you know, you're making money.
Yep.
You're saving money where I had like $100 to my name at that point. So I was excited to take anything. And I think I would say when I got into 22, 23, 24, I don't think I really realized my worth at that point, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I was just kind of like, and I was told constantly, I'm going to say it was a toxic work environment I was in. I don't like to throw those terms around because I feel like people use those loosely a little bit, but if it is, it is. And I was told multiple times, like, oh, you should be grateful for this opportunity, or you should be thankful for these opportunities. You know, this is something that you should be blessed. You know, people would kill to have your job, or, you know, kill to be in this position. And I was just kind of like, okay, you know, I guess at some point, you know, when someone starts telling you things over and over again, you start to believe that's true.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
You start to kind of minimize yourself and kind of downplay yourself. So to be honest, up until, I would say, even this year, I stayed in places, relationships. I stayed in like job place and just certain environments, friendships.
Yes.
Where I was not comfortable, but I didn't want to say anything because I was scared of that change, or I was scared to be seen as like a bitch, or aggressive, or too much, or expecting too much. To where I kind of had like a come to Jesus moment with one of my good friends, and she was just like, you're not any of those things. You shouldn't have to stay in certain environments just to please other people when they're not suiting you.
Yeah.
So it's weird how I kind of feel like I shifted almost a little bit, where I was like this confident person in my early 20s. And then when I got into that job environment, that's kind of when my confidence for some reason diminished and dwelled. And I'm kind of starting to pick it back up right now, to where I almost had like a thought the other day of, where did that person go?
Yeah.
In a sense, like, you know, why am I not who I was when I graduated college and I got my first interview, I got my first job. So I think it's just kind of, to sum it up, it's kind of where you are in certain points of your life. And I feel like your late to mid 20s, I'm going to say mid 20s. I'm not trying to sound old.
Thank you.
You know, it's that transition point to where you're kind of finding yourself again.
Yeah.
And you're building that brand, and you're maybe adding pieces of who you were in your early 20s, but then you're also kind of putting it together where it comes full circle. So I'm kind of in that point of my life right now.
Well, and you bring up something that I think a lot of people can relate to, because like you said, as you're in that transition point, and I like that word, the transition point, I think that really bears reflecting on, because when you're in that space, when you're trying to transition and understand kind of this new phase in your life, I think it can get a little uncomfortable. And then, like you said, you doubt yourself. Mm-hmm. And I think that is important, though, to kind of say and share and be honest about, because so many times people don't share that vulnerability. I think we all go through those phases. I feel like every 3 or 4 years, I'm going through, maybe more than that uncomfortable transition phase, because it's that new growth opportunity. And I think too, you know, I had the chance to go see Gabbi not that long, a couple months ago. Now that I think about it, it feels like it's much longer. Out in California. October. Yeah, like in October with our mom. And while we were out there, like, I think we went through, just as sisters, a transition point in our own lives. And it was uncomfortable and it was messy, but it was a really good place, because then there's this growth that happens so much after that, and that confidence and that strength that you're like starting to refine. It looks different, you know? And so in saying that and hearing that from you too, I think there are a lot of people out there that are in transition points, maybe in their mid 20s, you know, maybe in their mid 40s, mid 50s, that are like, okay, but when I'm in that transition point, how do you stay consistent in continuing to grow as it gets uncomfortable? So I'm curious for you, especially because it is still kind of ripe and raw for you as you're figuring that out. How do you stay consistent with trying to kind of, I don't want to say stay in that transition, but allow that transition to take you to the next step?
Yeah, I think it's just, this sounds cliche, but I think it's almost kind of like trusting the process. Yeah. And it's almost kind of like, you know, trusting your gut and trusting your intuition in a certain point, to where you know when something's right and you know when something's wrong, and you know when you're headed down that right path, and when something feels like sticky or when something feels uncertain. Like, for example, I was working out yesterday. I went to Orange Theory and I was doing a low row, and I was like, this doesn't feel right. And so I called the coach over there and I was like, am I doing this right? And he was like, no.
You are not.
He was like, you're not.
Absolutely not.
So,
at least he knew.
I was like, that's why my back hurts. So, and it's almost kind of like that. And it sounds silly, but I think especially us as women,
yes,
we know when something doesn't feel right, and we know when something does feel right, or we are headed down the right path. And I think it's also about trusting your expertise and being confident in who you are as well too, to know, you know, I do know what I'm talking about, or this is not going to be something that I settle for. This is not going to be my end or my final step.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think it's almost kind of like we put so much confidence in other people to tell us what to do, but at what point do we put confidence on ourselves to lead us down the right path and to tell us what is going to be the right step to go to as well? So,
yes.
I think that's kind of where I am, is like, I've listened to so many people for so many long, I'm going to start listening to myself, and I'm going to start trusting myself on what's right and what's wrong in my life. So.
I love that. I think that is so beautifully said, because I think we have to give ourselves permission to trust ourselves and to trust that we know what we're doing, but also to trust that we don't know what we're doing too, right? Like, and it's okay. Yeah. It's part of I love that you said, it's, you know, kind of working through the process and letting yourself work through that process. And in hearing that too, I think what it brings up for me, and, you know, we've been having these conversations, you know, as a family and especially as siblings, you know, around our own health and our own mental health. And, you know, I'm very honest about that. And I know you've begun to share a little bit more about your own journey too. But in those moments where you're transitioning and when you're trying to kind of trust the process, but also the process is messy and sticky, and you're trying to trust yourself within the process, where does your own health and your own mental health kind of fit into that trusting of the process?
Therapy.
Yes.
To be honest, I think I was the kind of a person, I think I first went to therapy when I was a senior in college. And at that point, mental health wasn't talked about a lot. And, you know, people made fun of me, to be honest. Like, why do you need to go to therapy? Is something wrong with you? Like, are you crazy? Like, no, I'm going through something and I'm seeking out resources, as should you.
Yeah.
And I hate this. I don't hate this answer because I feel like everybody uses it. But honestly, you know, therapy helps, because I feel like now in my therapy session, instead of them, I feel like a lot of people feel like therapy is them being self-diagnosed. And that's not, it can be that.
Right.
But I think for me now, where I'm at in this process, it's my therapist giving me the tools and she's giving me the resources to talk through it myself and to work through it myself. Because she kind of gave me a really good metaphor. She was like, you're living your life right now as if you're an egg.
Yep.
So you're an uncooked egg. And so she was like, whenever the egg falls, your world shatters and you crack and, you know, everything goes all over the place. She was like, versus where you could be living your life like a hard-boiled egg, to where, okay, you break, your outer shell breaks, but you still have the support and the backbone or the middle layer of the egg to go forward. And I think that thinking was like, okay, you know, something goes wrong. And I'm that kind of person where something goes wrong, I immediately, my heart races. I'm like, oh my gosh, I messed this up. But it doesn't have to be like that. They're giving you the tools and the resources to think through certain processes and how to think through them and how to go about them.
Yeah.
Instead of just having to go on it yourself or use coping mechanisms that we've used since we were like kids or teenagers, like survival through life. You know, why not use resources or train tools that you could use in your mind? So it's almost like when I'm talking to her and I'm talking through problems, she doesn't even say anything at this point anymore. She's just like, yep, looks like you figured it out.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's just really talking through and just knowing what resources that you have available to you. And it's okay to seek help, trained help. I think talking to your friends is good, yes, but it can only get so far unless they're a trained therapist, to where you can seek out those additional resources and those additional counseling sessions as well. So, I mean, that's my answer. Therapy has really been a powerful tool for me.
Yeah.
especially going into like my late 20s, it's helped me so much.
Yes.
So.
And, it goes back to being able to have the tools to trust yourself in the process, because I think we try and do so much. And especially as women, especially as Black women, we try and do so much.
Yeah.
We try and do too much. And we think that there's no support or resources out there when we just have to take the time and the effort and the energy to invest in what's going to be good for us. And I think that's so much part of the Fearlessly Made You journey. And so it kind of brings the question for me to ask you, as you think about the things that have been part of your life, and as you're continuing to grow and be more open, like you said, to building that foundation that when things go wrong, you don't just fall apart, but you really kind of stand yourself up and you're like, okay, I've got the right tools for this. How do you kind of think about that in a way where when I talk about being fearless, it's not being without fear? So when we're talking about fearlessly made, it's not allowing that fear to own you. So, and thinking about it in that context, what does it mean for you to live kind of that fearlessly made existence? So acknowledging the fear, but not allowing the fear of the things around you, the difficulties, the stresses, the things that can make you fall apart, not allowing them to own you.
I think there's a lot to be said about being authentic.
You are that.
And people always tell me that. I've never met somebody like you.
Yeah,
so
that's true. Same. I've never met anyone like you.
Genetic thing.
Maybe, yeah.
But I think, and I feel like it's another cliche answer, but it's just where I'm at in my stage of life, is I think it's easier said than done, is where a lot of the answers people will say is, oh, be yourself or be authentic. But have you really met somebody who is their self 100% of the time?
Right.
So I think there is something to be said for going down that journey and going down that pathway to just being authentic and just be yourself. And I'm reading this book right here. It's called The Revolution from Within. And so it's called a book of self-esteem. And so it's basically kind of about like owning your journey and kind of going down that pathway to live authentically and to live for yourself as well too, and not living for what other people expect for you, but living for your own standards.
Yeah.
So I think it's just really about, there's only going to be one you in this life. You're living is for you, not for anybody else. Where yes, you may have a spouse or you may have partners or you may have kids, but at the end of the day, this short life that we're living is for us.
Yeah.
So in order to kind of make it through what we're doing, is you just have to own yourself, own your journey, and just be authentic to who you are at the end of the day. And nobody can take that away from you. Yes, there's growing points and we should all grow as a person, but we're still going to be rooted in our authenticity. I can't talk today.
Authenticity?
Authenticity.
That works. I think that's right.
But
yeah.
I don't know if that answered the question.
Yes. It did.
But that's, kind of the groundwork that I'm living on right now.
Yeah. And I love that, because I think being an authentic human means being open and honest about who you are. And I feel like you've always been unapologetically yourself. And when you weren't there, like when you were talking about before, when your confidence was lagging, which was unusual for you, it's hard to also still maintain that authenticity, because you're definitely in that vulnerable space of saying, okay, I don't feel like myself and I don't know who I'm supposed to be and what that looks like. So I say all of that to think about people in your life, and especially I kind of want to dive in a little bit to your work and the people that you get to work with. Of course, you get to help others, you get to help teenagers kind of guiding their journey. So talk to us a little bit more about, how you are bringing your authentic self to this new phase in your life from a career perspective as well. Some of the things you get to do, because I don't know if a lot of people understand kind of what it means to have, someone that's in educational counseling and what that means.
Do you want me to explain my job a little bit more?
Sure. That would be great. I don't mind that at all. I think our Fearlessly Made You crew would love that too.
So basically kind of what I do is my role is there's two sides kind of to our benefit, to where I have the dedicated clients that we work with to help advise and work with them throughout the college application process, or even throughout high school, steps they should be taking to kind of help with their college applications. But then I also do like phone counseling and consults with families of Fortune 500 companies. I'll just say that because there's tons of them. There's over 200 different Fortune 500 companies that we work with, to where we're helping their kids, either through like 45-minute consults or essay reviews or webinars or whatnot. We're helping them with how to accurately strategize their college application and what steps they can take from as early as, I've talked to like an 8th grader, down to students who are submitting their applications right now. So that's kind of a little bit of my line. Now, 5 years ago, I was just like a college admissions counselor, to where I was essentially just like a recruiter. Yeah. And I worked and I made decisions on application files. And I went out and recruited students for the college I was working with. So can you repeat the question again? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no, you're good. So, it's kind of thinking about advice you would give people that are trying to also kind of live their fearless existence and what that looks like. And, but what I was kind of leaning into before getting to that part was more about kind of how you've brought your authentic self to your work. And then I'd love to and you're welcome to kind of like dive into a little bit further, like not just like how you're bringing that to your work, but then also how you're helping other people kind of live their authentic, like fearlessly made you life too.
Right. So I think a big part of how I bring like my authentic side to my work is, I think, being somebody who I wanted to be a lawyer, and I wanted to kind of be in that advocacy space of helping students and just helping people in general where they can't necessarily help themselves, or they don't see a pathway, or they don't see kind of a line to help themselves, as well as I want to ensure and make sure that I'm giving students and families, especially now with COVID, and with what we're dealing with now, is a lot of students are still, a lot of mental health issues, a lot of family issues, because, essentially, and especially now out here with California with the surges, some students now are still remote learning 2 years into the pandemic. So it is a lot of those struggles that they're facing. And a lot of kids are just, it's kind of like a gap that they're missing. Whereas for us, it was normal, we went to school, we got to do sports, we got to do extracurricular activities, we got to do all these other things, and they're missing those integral parts of their life that really help shape and form them, I think, now. So I think it's about, for me, is giving students the tools and the resources for them to, one, advocate for themselves in the application process and in the admissions process. But then two, I feel like what I've been doing a lot lately is also giving them the tools to really build up their self-confidence and to really show them this is what you have to offer, a college campus. Here's how you can phrase, or here's how you can word that in your application. Yeah. Or here's how you can better talk about that in your application or your essay, or when you go to interview with an admissions rep or something like that. But I think now, kind of in my line of work, I'm almost finding that I'm giving them that little extra boost and that little extra bit of confidence that they're missing without getting that kind of people skills or getting that one-to-one face-to-face interaction and instruction a lot of times as well. So yeah, I think that's kind of a really big thing for all educators in our line of work right now is, we kind of have to be those boosters and building kids up and giving them those building blocks and those foundations that they normally would have gotten in other kind of areas.
That's something that I think is so real right now. And I don't think a lot of people that have kids are understanding that. But I think, for people kind of whatever space you're living in, living in Florida, a lot more things are open, although there is virtual school too. But like you said, like when you're still on full true lockdown and kids are only spending time in their homes and trying to go to school that way, you don't realize how much they're missing. And I think there's so much value in you helping to build upon other people's journeys. I think one of the other things too, like you said, like, you were a college student athlete as well. So you've had those experiences and have had the things that have helped kind of build you up. But it's hard for you to replicate that for other students without them having those resources. So I love that you're able to help support that gap that exists. That is such a hard place to be. And it's kind of, it can make you sad to think about. Yeah. But I think what you said is really important, which is I'm helping to build their confidence so that, instead of focusing on, not to say that it's not real, focusing on the other side of things and, kind of the distress of not having that quote unquote, like normal kid experience where you got to go in person to school. This is your normal kid experience. So how are you helping them now show up new and show up in this environment? What would you say has been maybe the most difficult part, and thinking especially right now throughout the pandemic, because, you took on this position during the pandemic. So how has that been interesting for you from a transition perspective, considering your previous position was like pre-pandemic and now like being in the pandemic, and not to like hone in on the pandemic, but it's just a different world, especially in education right now. Yeah. So I'm just curious about your perspective there.
Yeah, I think it's different now because versus when I would just go and kind of read applications, it was almost kind of like students, they knew they had time, right? Mm-hmm. And they knew kind of what their general timeline was for applying to colleges or for looking for colleges or going to visit or, saying, okay, this is the school I'm going to, right? Kids generally knew that they still had time. Whereas now I feel like kids, and this is actually what several parents have actually told me when I'm on the phone with them, is we feel like we don't have time and we feel like we're missing something, that we missed out on 2 years or a year and a half of that process, which to their point, that is true. Because I mean, when I worked at High Point, I left High Point when it's 2022. Oh my gosh. So it's 2021. So I left High Point in the summertime. So I had kids in the pandemic. So when the pandemic started, who said, hey, I'm going to this university, but they had never saw it, or they never looked at it, or they never put their eyes on it. They couldn't visit yet. So it was kind of that kind of thought process and that kind of transition thought process too, where kids are kind of, there's that lapse or there's that lagging kind of area in, making that decision and coming up with that decision, to where they're not able to do extracurricular activities. They're not able to visit colleges before they make that decision, but then after they make that decision, they still don't know if tours are going to be open, or they still don't know if that's going to be something. So I feel like a lot of times parents and students are just like, we don't have as much time as we thought we did. So it is a lot of like anxiety, and it is a lot of like rushing, and they feel like, this problem has to be solved right now. Where it's like, no, like take a step back, like let's breathe a little bit. You still have time to complete these steps of your life. So
I have to say, first of all, thank you for being that voice for people. Not that you need me to thank you, but just there's such a piece that you're able to give people. And if they're not thanking you, for everyone that's like kind of out there, like, thank you for that. Because I know there are people that are sitting here like, okay, like it's not as rushed, it's not as hurried. And then I think you're a perfect example too, is like there are a lot of steps that we've been told we're supposed to be taking to get to this next phase. But like, especially from, going from high school to college, but also you got to college yourself, made it to your senior year, realized there was a whole other transition you needed to go through, and look how successful you are now, and it's that piece too, which I think also comes with the calm and the resolve that you're able to provide to people. Cause it's like, it's gonna be okay. You just have to kind of step into what this new phase looks like. And it's, we're all still trying to figure it out.
Right. And it's like, when I tell parents that, like, it's going to be okay. It's, it's kind of like, well, no, but eventually, like, you kind of have to be that calming sound. And like you're saying, like, it's going to be okay. It's going to all work itself out. And then sometimes you do have to remind them that, we're all going through this stage of life together.
Yeah.
The person who's reading your application, the people who are processing your application, I rest assured there's not anybody in the world, I don't think, that is not going through COVID-19 pandemic.
Right. And wherever they are, let's find whoever's not going through it.
Can I go to where they are? So it's kind of like you have to remind them that, and because they feel like, well, she didn't get to do this, and that. But I'm just like, they know, when they're reading your application that your 9th and 10th grade years, we were pretty much on lockdown.
Yeah.
So nobody was able to do things. So I always just tell students and parents, like, focus on what you can control.
Yes.
Versus focusing on what you can't control. We can't control that right now.
Yeah.
But what were you able to take advantage of throughout the pandemic? What did you learn? Whether that was taking care of a sick family member, did you take care of your grandma or you take care of your grandpa? That's something that you did and that you accomplished over the pandemic.
Yeah.
Did you learn a new skill? Even if it's something as small as like skateboarding. I had a kid tell me that he learned skateboarding. That's a new skill. That's something that you accomplished. So it's kind of like you have to remind them that you did do something over this pandemic, and let's uncover and let's unpack those accomplishments and let's unpack all of those different steps and tools so that we can talk about it a little bit more in your application.
You're so good at this. Like, I like that talking through. I mean, and I think too, like hearing you talk through it because, real facts, we as siblings don't sit around talking about our jobs. We've got other things to talk about, like wine. And so that's what we talk about. But no, I think what you're saying is so spot on for so many people. So I'm thinking even like just outside of the world that you're working in with kids and helping them, their parents kind of understand this process. I think there are a lot of people that needed to hear that too, which is we have all been in a pandemic. And again, not to harp on it, but it's the reminder now as we're in this weird space in 2022, where we're like, wait, we're still here? Like what happened?
Yeah.
And it's that, and we had a fun end to our 2021 for sure as a family.
I sure did.
Oh, Gabbi. We'll just leave that there. Well, we can be honest and vulnerable about it. We all did a quarantined ring-in of the New Year's as the Tobias siblings.
Especially me.
Yep. Gabbi was in full quarantine. I feel like we went through all of the phases that you're talking about. So like we went through the like, oh no, what do we do? And then we went through I guess we just follow the rules that have been like outlined for COVID. And then we went through now we go party. We may party in quarantine mode, but we're going to party and just enjoy life and enjoy each other. But it does bring me the question though, especially as you're kind of working with these kids and their families, thinking about yourself. So like thinking about when you were a teenager and you were going through these processes, thinking about teenage Gabbi. So for you guys to know, because you probably can't tell.
Was an angel.
Oh my. There are lies happening on this podcast right now.
Ever in our family.
Can't be privy to the lies
absolute angel.
There's so much
the
lies.
Best kid.
All of it.
You can call mom and dad right now.
I will call them and they will say exactly. Gabbi is 9 years younger than I am. And my mom called Gabbi my birth control because of the angel that she was.
Absolute angel.
But you definitely, through high school, it's always hard to be the baby, right? Because it's four of us, as you guys know, you guys have met so far, Gabbi, and then you met my brother, Josh. There's another brother, Drew, who you guys will get to meet soon. And as it was me, Drew, Josh, and then Gabbi. And so by the time Gabbi's in high school, we're all gone actually, including Josh, basically. Like Josh maybe was like in his senior year when you guys were like a year and a half.
I think I had the house to myself at that point.
Yeah. So like the not that there's per se camaraderie with siblings, especially when you're teenagers, because you don't like each other when you're young. But there was definitely a different experience that I think you had. And so I'm very curious for you, for where you were as a teenager, because I know, some of the things that I know you were going through. What would you share with yourself? So thinking about yourself now, and I asked Josh this too, because knowing y'all, I know from the outside looking in, even though I'm inside, but your journeys. And so like when you're younger, thinking about teenage Gabbi, maybe 15, 16-year-old Gabbi, what is something that you now, so now that you've admitted to being late 20s Gabbi, what would late 20s Gabbi, you said late at one point too, but what would 20s Gabbi say to like 15, 16-year-old Gabbi now to like, as you've been doing with kids, give them the confidence, give them the boost that they need? Like, what's something that you would want that your younger self to know right now?
That's a really good question. I think for me, yes, being the baby, I had all these expectations. I don't know if I lived up to at some point, which that's okay. I think I was that late bloomer, but I don't think that said anything to my intelligence or who I was. I think that was just, I didn't want to do certain things, or I don't know, I don't know what it was. But I think for me, I would say, seek out help, because I think when I was 15, 16, I was going through mental health issues. But again, at that age, it was not readily talked about. Or it's kind of like going back to, I tell my friends this, going back to like our family, we're blessed because mental health isn't necessarily talked about a lot in the Black community. It is now. Yeah. But growing up, it really isn't. But I think for us, we had parents who, they had degrees in like education and psychology and, stuff like that. So they could maybe recognize some of those signs a little bit more. Yeah. And I think for me is I didn't necessarily know what I didn't know, and I didn't know kind of what I was struggling with mental health wise. Absolutely. So I think if I could have just like reached out or just said, hey, something doesn't feel right, or, I don't feel okay most of the days, like what's wrong with me? Instead of just kind of like brooding and just staying in that place, because I feel like if I would have taken advantage of some of those things, I could have been in so much more of like a happier spot when I was a kid. Yeah. I just don't feel like I wasn't a happy teenager. I'll just put it that way. Yeah. Yes, I know. But I think from the outside looking in, I was a cheerleader, and I played lacrosse, and I did all of these things. But like when I went home, that switch kind of flipped and it turned off for me. Yeah. So it was kind of just like I don't want to be here. And I remember I told myself that at one point. So I think it's really just if I would have sought out help or just talked to somebody, I think that could have been a bigger transition, and that could have been really a saving grace for me. And I think too, it was also kind of like, I feel like that's kind of where my confidence and always telling people to advocate for themselves, because I feel like a lot of times in high school, and I think I told you and mom this when you guys visited, a lot of times in high school, I did have teachers tell me like I wasn't smart, or I'm not like my siblings, or, I'm not going to be able to do this, this, and this. Or like I had coaches who told me that, to playing sports. So I think that's kind of where, I did have to stick up for myself a lot of times, or, I did have to tell people that's not me. I think as well too, is like knowing how to properly advocate for yourself without being a bitch and rude. Yeah. I love that. Too. I think what you said, and let's do a little PSA announcement for any teachers or coaches out there. Or counselors. I will say that counselors too. I did have a counselor tell me that too. And you and I think, and I'll get into this because I think we had a very interesting experience that paralleled each other, but do not disrespect. And I am having a little moment just because knowing that people said that to you, and you did tell us that, and it's so disrespectful, but don't disrespect the journey of someone else, regardless of who you are, because you don't know what people are going through. Remember that everyone has a story and everyone has something that they're working through. So to disrespect someone by telling them something that they can't ever be, and you don't even know what is actually going to develop within that person, is just, it's not your right, and you don't have that authority. Yeah. And it's interesting because I think I told you, and it's in the book, I talked about a counselor who basically rolled her eyes at me when I came in for some real mental health. I was going through very, very strong mental health issues at that time. And it's interesting, at the timing of when you were a teenager was the timing when I was going through all the post-traumatic stress disorder things. But I think for us, and I think this too is something that is important, and I love that you're bringing this up so strongly, is
listening to the naysayers is not going to bring the strength that you need, but it's hard not to, but also not having the conversations, not seeking the help. Like you honed in on, therapy is huge, and being able to have the right people in your life to point you in that direction is so important. But it's also, when we were going through our mental health issues, we were at such odds with each other as sisters. Not that we ever, we're very blessed that as a family, we siblings have not had like terrible relationships by any means. We just didn't see eye to eye. But I think a lot of that too was we were going through so many things within ourselves that you can't look up from it. And so I really like the message that you're giving to yourself. It's not do better. It's, I wish that I had found the help to help you. And I think that's the thing. But now you are doing that in a way that's not just helping yourself, but helping so many other kids. And so it's that grace piece that you're in now, which I think is so beautiful. And it's cool to watch that as your big sister, to see you blossoming and growing. I know, little emotional moment.
Go ahead and cry.
I know. We may cry, but it's definitely a cheers moment. Like I want to cheers to you and what you've done and who you've become, because I am so grateful for that. But I also think something around that too, that you've started to talk through is, the help and support that you need, but also the balance that you need, especially as you're in this new phase in your career. And I'd love to know, as you're thinking through everything that you've been going through, as you're kind of seeking the help that you need, there also has to be some balance in how you take care of you and how you kind of step back. And so I think about balance for you, but also like you were saying to the parents and the kids, they also need to know like, it's okay. Like you're fine. And that gives them a little bit of a balance and hope to say, okay, I don't have to like rush through all these things. How are you finding balance in your own life? But then also, how are you sharing what balance looks like to the people that you're also, working with and counseling?
I think a lot of times, and especially like in your 20s, you hear all the time is like, go, 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 go. Like you're young, you can work, you can do all this. But I think, not to bring it back to the pandemic, but I think COVID kind of undid that kind of with hustle culture in a sense.
Yes.
I feel like a lot of times, like my first job, it was kind of like hustle culture. Like it's cool to be burnt out. Like I remember I would go days without getting sleep, or I would, be up all night at like a college fair, and then I would catch like a 5 a.m. flight, back home. And that was cool. Like people were like, oh my gosh, like you're so cool, but that's not cool.
It's not.
Like it's not cool at all. It's not cool to be tired, and it's not cool to be burnt out either. And I think that's kind of what was eye-opening to me too, because I feel like right before COVID, I remember specifically because California was the first state to shut down.
Yes.
It's not funny, but it's funny looking back because I was just like, that meme, like, oh no. Oh, like,
oh no!
I don't have any toilet paper. Yeah, that was me. I was like, I don't have any toilet paper. I don't have any food. I didn't know. Nobody was going through that except for like me and my roommate at the time together. So I remember I was coming back from a flight to San Francisco. I feel like this is a long answer.
No, it's perfect. You're good. Continue.
I was coming back from a flight from San Francisco, and at that point, San Francisco was like, I think number one in the number of COVID cases. And again, that was coming back from a work trip. So I happened to be sick. I didn't have COVID.
To be clear, that time.
But I remember right before I took that trip, and I think I talked to you, I never get flight.
Yes, you called me.
I would fall asleep on planes. Like, it'd be like a cross country trip. But then for some reason, 2 months before that, like I was just feeling burnt out, and I was feeling like I had just a lot of anxiety towards like flying or just traveling for work in general. So I feel like that pandemic came at like a perfect time for me, because I didn't realize how burnt out I was, because it was just like go, 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 go. And I know I didn't travel as much as you did. But
you traveled a lot. You were traveling a lot. Yeah.
I was traveling a lot, and I had just moved to California. So I still didn't get a chance to like acclimate myself in a new state, personal wise. Professional wise, I was good, but personal wise, I wasn't. So I feel like for me, COVID really kind of helped me kind of ground myself and realize, your life doesn't have to be work. Like, it's okay if you step out in the middle of the day and go take a walk or go to a workout class in the middle of the day. I feel like that's what I'm so thankful for my job right now, because day one, my supervisor was like, if you want to go take a Pilates class in the middle of the day and you know you're done with your work, go do that. You know? Yeah. Or she's like, if you're traveling home for Christmas or for the holidays and you want to work from home for the holidays, go do that.
Yeah.
You know, work is important, yes, but also like you can't work when you're not your whole self.
Yes.
Or you can't work when you're not fulfilling yourself or your needs. So I feel like for me, it's just like when we keep doing this repetition of life or work or working on college applications or anything like that, like that's not normal. One. And like I tell kids, like if they're working on their essay, you know what I advise for you is take a breather.
Yeah.
Like I know this application is due tomorrow, but you will be okay. I promise. Like take the night off and just be a kid.
Yes.
And you can return to it later. I promise you it's not going to go anywhere. It's still going to be there. And I feel like that now for my personal life is walk away from your computer for 30 minutes. Like work is still going to be there.
Step away.
You know, but
step away from it. Yeah.
Your life and your health and your mental health may not always be, you know, at that right exact spot that you need to be. So you need to do these things that are going to fuel you and bring you joy as well too.
I love that. And you bring up a good point that I think is a great way for us to, I think talking about balance is one of the best ways that I love to like end our time together. But one thing that I think connects to that balance, it'll be kind of my last conversation point with you is one of the things, you know, I love to do when it comes to balance and finding it is drink wine. And we have had the wonderful opportunity to go to wine country together. Not the wine country that everyone thinks about, but Temecula. If you haven't been, y'all are missing out. It's
You're in for a treat.
Beautiful wine country. But my question for you is, and this will kind of be that closer. So you got to make it good, Gabbi. I believe in you. Oh. You've got this. I know, no pressure. What is your go-to wine?
Ooh. I don't know. I think you know what I'm going to say.
I do know what you're going to say.
I'm curious if you think it is, but
I'll tell you.
Rosé all day, baby.
I knew it. Yep, I knew it. I almost had a rosé today just for you, but I knew it was probably going to be a red wine kind of day. But no, I knew that was going to be it. When we were in Temecula, we bought these 2 bottles of rosé that were just amazing. But yes, I knew that was what you were going to say. I love it.
I feel like it's like a winter drink. Well, it's not a winter drink actually at all.
It's kind of all the time. You can drink it any time.
Yeah, and it's always, for some reason, it's always at wine tastings. I don't know why. Is there like a correlation to that?
I don't know. I think it's just delicious. I think that's the correlation.
If I could just have like a bath of rosé.
Oh, girl. We have now escalated this situation. With that,
we're now getting into the PG-13 version of
we went too far. We're in the X-rated version now. Gabbi, it's been a pleasure. No, honestly,
I'm gonna take my bath, y'all.
I know she's about to go take her bath in her rosé. But no, honestly, thank you for, of course, being my sister, but just for sharing your story and for being so honest and open. I know a lot of people are going to find such value in this conversation, but I just appreciate you and I love you. And thank you so much for being on Fearlessly Made You.
Thank you for having me. If I haven't bought the book, buy the book. It's not in front of me right now, but it is here. I promise you, it's in my apartment.
She's read it.
It's just it's not in front of me. But if you haven't bought the book, you're missing out.
I love it. Well, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to see another set of Tobiases. And please make sure you stay tuned for the next episode of Fearlessly Made You.